Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you on the session on standardization, so business case for standards. We would like to make this session as interactive as possible with the participation of the attendees as well. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Esther Batta. I'm a Deputy Head of Unit for the SME policy in the European Commission's DG GROW department. So we are coordinating SME policy all across the Commission. Standardization is a topic which is very close to my heart, and I've been working on this in the past. So I'm very happy to be moderating this session. I would like to first introduce the speakers and afterwards tell you how we are going to organize this session. So on my left, the first speaker is Claire Baillet, who is the founder and CEO of Icono. Did I pronounce it well?
Icono.
Icono company, who is producing adaptive swimwear in a very innovative process, and she is going to explain to us how standardization and standards helped her bring her product to the market. Next speaker is going to be Mette Pitsko. Who is the leading senior consultant for Danish industry, also responsible for standards. And she is going to tell us also from the Danish perspective of how businesses can use standards and how they can contribute to standards making. And our final speaker is Andrea Raffaelli, who is a senior policy advisor with Small Business Standards, which is the voice of SMEs in standardization, who is also going to tell us more from a systemic perspective how SMEs can be helped in order so that they better use standards, but also that they contribute to the making of standards. But before we start, I want to ask you just with the simple raising of hands, how many of you know what standards are? Okay, so it's already very good. So I know that you actually showed up here because you know what standards are. How many of you are using standards? Okay, let's say half of the crowd. And how many of you are contributing to the making of standards in one way, participating in technical committees and so on? Or are you doing it yourself? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, so, but actually the purpose of this is the purpose of a session is to see how we can use standards, but how can SMEs also contribute to making standards. And with that, we are going to have 3 very short presentations. And afterwards, I'm going to open the floor for questions and comments as well. So with that, Claire, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So basically, I'm Claire Baillet, and I founded this company 2 years ago, a swimwear lifestyle brand, inclusive, which is also supporting sustainability standard, which is meant to be a good brand for women who somehow went over 30 years old and who basically suddenly see their body shaping differently. And also women who got through surgeries and who basically have other needs in terms of product. And especially when it comes to products which are close to your body, so what I found very surprising was that somehow fashion stops here. So when you somehow come out of the norms or out of the standards, it looks like products are very little adapted to lifestyle and to the certain way, to the way women should be living their life. So I was very intrigued by that also because my background before this experience was to work within corporates in lifestyle retail for more than 20 years. I found that very surprising that somehow a part of the women were completely forgotten as soon as something happens in their life. So basically I started working with hospitals, with patients, with women who basically just went over the 40 years old. And started to find out that somehow there was a big need in the market to develop some products which were somehow bridging the comfort, the functionality, as well as the lifestyle approach. So by saying this, then I started to think, okay, but how could we make product not as normal fashion, but try to make it also with a very strong purpose in the end, which is also trying to be cleaner, trying to be sustainable, and at the same time ensuring that projects were done in the right conditions. Meaning, for me, in my understanding, and because I'm strongly European, actually I'm French, being based in Brussels, but having lived my life in most countries in Europe and outside, then I thought I would try to figure out which fabrics I can use, which are sustainable, which are produced in Europe, and at the same time finding some manufacturer which are also in Europe based, which was a true challenge, I have to say. So in the end, I worked with also very talented designer who comes from fashion industry, working with patients, working with hospitals so that I get a good sense of what products should look like. And in 2023, I launched a collection which was designed in Belgium, sustainability produced, and also crafted in Spain with a very strong eco-friendly mindset in mind. So what am I saying all this? Is because as an entrepreneur, I could have chosen to do like most of other competitors are doing, which is taking the simple path of producing at the other side of the world for all the good cost reasons as being the key driver of this initiative, and not to burden with lots of different legislations and regulations that you might have. But I took the opposite directions, which was for me somehow relying on some strong standards and quality standards, which for me were somehow in my purpose-led thinking was the right thing to do, and also to bring confidence towards the consumer, as well as the retail partners, as well as the entire ecosystem. So basically, I relied on all the regulations that I knew in terms of brand protections, so which was a critical point for me. First, to protect my brand. I couldn't patent the design, but somehow trademarking and protecting as much as I could. Bringing the quality standards coming mainly from suppliers, which are already working with some recognition such as Ecotex, such as GRS, simply because in terms of understanding of the product and the quality, especially in the health environment, because somehow I was also touching to women who had some surgery, so the skin is also a very strong element in the product design and in the construction of the product, and at the same time ensuring that basically the whole supply chain was as close as possible to the market that I wanted to export to. So basically, I really dig into lots of informations to try to find the right partners. Again, from a production standpoint, from the yarn production standpoint, finding the true origin of the fabrics, which somehow also was helped through the standards, simply because by having these recognitions, which is already existing in Europe and beyond, it for me simplifies the test, the cost of doing the test. And to be very honest, as entrepreneur, you hardly have so much time to do all this. So for me, it was a great opportunity to rely on those standards to start building the collections and the developments. Obviously, sustainability and circularity, when you start talking to your partners, not just the productions and the manufacturing, but also the retailers and the consumer, they understand. And they understand very well what you are talking about. And for them, it's a gauge, or it's a quality standard that helps me to get to the market. And certainly, for me, that was an important point to get as well into the EU market more quickly. So basically, the impact that it has on my business to rely on some standards which exist, I haven't created myself standards, right? I've just basically took the ones that I knew, the ones that, and I don't know all of them. That's the point that I will be making later on. But basically from me, from my perspective, all those standards helped to create the trust. Trust within my retail partners, with the markets that I was starting to develop the brand into, but as well as the consumer. And the consumer, they need to be educated, because again, just before we talked about e-commerce and so on, we can't prevent e-commerce. And by the way, I'm also selling on e-commerce. But as soon as you start explaining people why they should pay a little bit more, they understand. Not everybody will understand, but at least they understand why they should pay a premium price. And not everybody wants to have €3 T-shirts on their body, right? So that's part of my mission. It's about educating. Where we stand now, so again, I launched this brand 2 years ago. I raised some money as well to make it work, because again, that's one of the roadblock that any SMEs, or I'm a startup, I'm not an SMEs, but this is where that's where it starts, especially when you start working with developing some collections. You always need to have some cash flow. You always need to produce before. And the beauty of what I'm doing as well is not to produce with overstock, because everything is produced in Spain, in the area of Barcelona. I know there are some people from Barcelona here, because there is some craftsmanship. People know how to do it. And at the same time, everything is stocked in Brussels, which means that also for the retailers, they have product availability all year long in a very short period of time on permanent collections, which avoid overproductions, overstock, and at the same time for retailers to do some sales. So my collection, you don't sell the product. So there is no promotion. There is no overstock, simply because the collections are permanent. We are now expanding the brand. So we test the Belgian market, which is a very good market test, actually. And now we expand into Holland, into Germany, Austria, and France. I'm still looking for partners. I'm still looking for new markets. Maybe Danish market is an opportunity. But definitely by putting those standards forward, these standards are recognized by all those markets and by all retailers. And somehow we speak the same language. So for me, there is definitely an opportunity with the standards, and to use them, to rely on them, to help growing and to navigate quicker. I couldn't have done that if I had to start from scratch again. But on the other hand, and we talked a lot about simplification, I think, since the beginning of this session, simplification remains. It doesn't mean that we don't need to have high standards. No, that's not what I mean. I just mean make our lives easier in understanding what we can get, how we can get fundings. Because again, that's one of the key roadblocks of growing up and scale up. It's also an opportunity for us to be even more engaged if we know how to do it, right? I'm sure that you are all with good intention, but I'm pretty sure that maybe 1/3 of all what you are doing is unknown by SMEs or startups like me. Also, the partners, the people that we talk to when you want to expand or when you want to get some fundings, for instance, don't necessarily speak the same language as you. So it has to have a business-driven purpose. Because otherwise there's lots of money being spent, but not for the right purpose. So for me, and again, that's what I said at the very beginning, I'm a very pro-European and convinced about that. And I want to remain in Europe for my productions, because I think it makes sense. And I'm sure that it makes sense to make it even stronger in the future by bringing this simplification that I'm talking about. So in the end, our mission is to dream big. Now we are in Europe, but we want to expand further, and we are just in 4 countries, potentially 5. But we want to grow, and we want to grow further because those products, for instance, again, are meant to cover a specific need, which is the customer needs, which has a very strong purpose, and that's why basically I strongly believe that standardization as Europe has a role to play. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Claire. I mean, really impressive success story of, we have heard from you how standards are creating trust. Trend standards are helping speak the same language, which helps you also scale up, get financing, get investors, but also scale up cross borders. So if you're going to go, I very much hope that when you're going to go through these other markets, these standards are going to be recognized there as well, because one European standard replaces 27 national standards. And this is why you will not have to explain once again when you are exporting to another country what these standards mean and how they are bringing also high quality to your product. So with this, I would like to ask Mette to give her presentation, who's going to tell us also how all this is linked to product compliance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This session is called The Business Case of Standardization. Is it on? Yes? Good. And I was just thinking, I mean, what is it all about? For me, it's really much about finding attractive solutions to practical problems. That is what I think standards do, and that is what I will talk about when I talk about the business case. First of all, I think it's important to distinguish between using standards and then participate in the standardization. I think in terms of maturity, many companies, they will start using standards, and when they see all the benefits it has, they will move into participation. What is in the state of play right now? What we see is, in a Danish context, it's 99% of all companies with a size of 1 to 50 employees, they buy, at this point, 74% of the standards from Danish standards. So we can see there is an underrepresentation in terms of how many buy standards. We can also see when we look at the numbers in the year report from Danish Standard that in total it's about 30,000 standards that's being applied or bought a year, but we have about 400,000 companies, so the potential is huge. We can see one thing is use, the higher maturity level will be to participate in standardization, and there, of course, I will assume there is a bigger difference in participation, but we don't really have any numbers to document how many are actually active in standardization from SME side compared to others, and we don't have specific numbers in use. But this was a try to make it more clear. And then you can say with standardization, what is good about standardization when I look at it and when I speak to my members, it's really when you talk to SMEs, even when you talk to startups and so on, they work together to find financing, about bookkeeping and all these things that are common across sectors. But what's good about standardization, if you participate in standardization, then it's really about what you're keen on. So if you're talking about your textiles and the different qualities of the textiles, in standardization, then you meet all the experts who are really keen on that aspect. And that's something you can't find anywhere else. So moving to the benefits in more general, there are basically the same, both from using standards and also from participation in standardization. But the most important thing has to do with market access. And that was what you were talking about. This was your key to market access. It's also a question of finding state of the art. What is it that the market is expecting from you, and what is the best that the market can actually do? And by using that, of course, then you have a competitive advantage comparing to those who don't. It's about knowledge. It's about inspiration. And of course, the more you're into it, if you participate, then you can also influence how the market is developing, how the standards are developing, and you will get a network of these experts I was just talking about, the nerdy ones that will want the same as you. So it's not on all this, we hear a lot about financing and all the other things that are, of course, most important for being in the world, but I think what people forget is when you are especially an entrepreneur, and if you move up and you want to scale up and so on, you're all the startups I meet, they are in love with their product. But they most often don't know there are standards like you're talking about. So they are trying to deal with all these aspects themselves, not knowing that they can actually have great inspiration from looking into standards, reading them, and if they have more time, of course, also engage with all the other experts who are very keen on that specific topic. Then there is a special case, and I guess many of you use standards and you knew about standards, so you will also know there are those special standards that creates for presumption of conformity with EU law. That's a tiny, tiny bit. I think it's 4% of all standards out there, but they're extremely important in a European context because you can apply them voluntarily, and if you apply them, then you can assume that your product can move freely all over the internal market, and the market surveillance authorities will not question that your product is actually compliant. What I hear from basically everybody is we don't want to be stuck with what's only European. We want to be sure that if we start using standards and we apply them in our products and our services, then we want to make sure that we can also go global. And a lot of companies these days, they might not even start in Europe, because they have bigger markets outside, so they might start with international standards. So therefore, one of the key interests for companies of all sizes, and especially also for SMEs, is actually to be sure that you can use an international standard and it's aligned with a European, and the European is aligned with an international, because otherwise, basically, you have to redesign your product, or you have to redo all your compliance work, and that, of course, adds a lot of extra cost. So how do we actually increase use and participation of SMEs? I mean, for me, it's clear from all I've been talking to is it has to increase the knowledge that this is actually an attractive solution you have out there that you might not know about. You have practical problems on your product, on market access. You have a lot of inspiration. You should know that. And then, of course, it has also to do with ease of access. How do I get access to these standards, and how do I get access to becoming part of these technical committees that form the standards also for the future? And there we can say we have an unfortunate thing on the use of standards in general. I mean, you cannot access them before you have bought them. And of course, that if you don't know what you can really get, it's quite difficult. So I think it would be a big advantage for everybody if you could have greater access to the content in a certain form before you buy them, because then you know what you really get. But combined with very good case studies, like the one we just heard about here, because if you have case studies and you are thrilled, I mean, could that also be possible for me? Then you might be more willing to go and buy it and actually explore it. So I think that is really the most important thing. It could also be more use in legislation. Of course, it's voluntary to apply it in education, or in legislation. But I mean, the more legislation we have that rely on voluntary application of standards, the more access or the more interest, the more knowledge of what standards can provide for will actually be out there. A lot of talk about costs. I cannot comment on what should a standard cost or not cost. That's up to those organizations who sell them. But I think if you know the advantages of applying them, of all the inspiration you can get, I think cost is a minor question. Then when we go to participation, that's more tough, because as it is right now, participating in standardization take a long time. And the average production time of a standard that's applied in law is about 6.2 years, or 6.1 year, I think. So that's a lot of time, and it's a very long perspective when you want to go into market soon. So what I think is needed for SMEs are really some tailor-made products. And you can say the product could be that you can participate in a supervision group or something like that, or you can have some support groups. And that's actually some of our members who have suggested that to us, because the big companies, they really want the smaller ones to be there, because they are the suppliers for them, and they want everybody to be on board. So everything that can be done to engage SMEs in one way or the other in standardization, not only buying them, applying them, they love, because then they can work together. So therefore, I mean, if we can make some tailor-made projects where SMEs participate without, that would be great. Of course, the case studies are important here too. Targeted financial support is also important. It's easier. Will it be the most important one? I'm not sure. But what I think is very important is also that we make sure that these production times go down, that it's very easy for the SMEs to be there. We have simplified procedures that need to be put in place. We have more or limited formal requirements, more on the content, so you can actually focus on what is the best product here. And then, of course, to secure sufficient support and education for the people who participate in the standardization. And standards are used for compliance, not necessarily as a way to get presumption of conformity, but it's used because of the market needs it. And it's also used for complying with regulations. I have just put up there what we have done in DI to ease compliance for SMEs, and which very much addresses how do you get access to the standards, how do you participate, how do you use them in the European framework. They're up here on the floor if you want to, and there you can also see the different QR codes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so let's imagine that Claire's business is growing cross borders in a couple of years, months, and but in years from now, she will want to let's say, participate in the creation of a standard for adaptive swimwear for women. Why not? I don't know whether this exists today. If it would exist, you would have come across it. So maybe it doesn't exist. Like, let's imagine she would like to participate in a technical committee and influence. Once you will have many, many employees and you will have the resources to do this. So Andrea, what are the possibilities for the support which SMEs can get today in order to use standards and participate in standards making?
Well, thank you, Esther. Thank you, Claire and Mette, and obviously to all of you for attending. Following on the path that was laid down by the speakers before me, I think I would like to touch on both aspects, the use and obviously very importantly, the participation. Going with what the benefits are, and what the challenges are and how we can support, and ultimately, as Esther was saying, how we as SMEs can participate. Now, I think that there is a connection to the wonderful lecture that Professor Friederike Welter gave yesterday in how standards can be that form of incremental change and incremental innovation, but at the same time, how they can be difficult at times, their benefits to be quantified. And that is one of the barriers when we try to raise the awareness of SMEs about standards, is like, okay, but what is the concrete benefit? How can I quantify the concrete benefit? If an entrepreneur comes to me and says, okay, how much money do I make out of using that standard? How long does it take me to see what the benefit of using that standard is? It might be difficult to give a figure. And that is part of the difficulties of the case that we are here to make. So indeed, there are studies, macroeconomic studies, surveys that show consistently and strongly that the use and even more the participation of SMEs in standardization bring strong benefits. But again, the breakthrough is to quantify somehow those benefits, to make them known and use those concrete improvements to bring the SMEs to the table. Now, we see some of them. I feel that I'm doing a bit of mopping up work to an extent, because many of those benefits have already been highlighted in a very practical and strong way by Claire and Mette before. But indeed, cost reduction, because we streamline costs, the safety, the quality, the increased market opportunities, and particularly the trust. So how the fact that we use standards means that our vendors, our suppliers, along supply chains, along the life cycle of a product or of a process, the use of standards can improve trust and therefore improve market opportunities. And we see time and time again, particularly impacts on internationalization. Claire's example is fantastic from this point of view of producing and selling across different countries. We see that across studies produced in France, in the Nordics, there is up to 20% higher level of revenue, particularly linked to internationalization for SMEs that use standards. But then, as Esther was saying, the second aspect, the step beyond, the participation. We said it at the beginning of the room. We went from how many of you have heard about standards? How many of you use them? How many of you participate in it? And the number kept steadily decreasing, and that is natural because each of those steps requires more time, more attention. And particularly, we know that participation in standardization carries this element of time as an exceptional barrier. And it's a barrier that is factually difficult to overcome. We can try to put as many conditions in place as possible to participate more easily, but the time question is always going to be there. So on the one hand, let's make the conditions as easy as possible. On the other hand, how can we tackle the time issue? And this is something that Mette said at the end that I completely agree with. If we make sure, if we show that the time investment that our entrepreneurs and SMEs make shows a strong return, they will come. They will participate. It's about, we cannot change all that much the time that it takes for them to participate, but we can make a stronger case for the return of that investment. And in order to make the stronger case, we need several support measures, both on the side of use and on the side of participation. From this point of view, last year, SBS, along with other European organizations and member states, we wrote a quite thorough report and set of recommendations that we are quite proud of in terms of participation of SMEs and use of standards by SMEs at national level. So here you see some of the recommendations that came out. So lower cost in terms of buying standards, or perhaps bundle sales, implementation guides to practically help SME apply standards, read-only access to standards, that it's something that is already done in several countries. And then a point that is I take particularly to heart, I completely agree with, that Claire mentioned before. The monitoring, the knowing which standards to use. We've seen how incredibly difficult it can be at times, even for actors and SMEs and entrepreneurs that know about standards, which standards to use. If you look at the catalogs at European and international level, we're talking about thousands of documents that can be extremely technical and that are not, in the vast majority of cases, openly accessible. So how can an SME know which standard to use, even if they have all the goodwill in the world? So these monitoring tools, we have excellent examples actually in Germany, in Austria, in Italy, with services that can help SMEs see which standards apply to their area of work, or with their specific role in the supply chain. And then obviously events like this, whether more open or more for people already in the know. But what really breaks through for me is the importance of the testimonials, of having entrepreneurs like Claire that indeed come to us and tell us, this is my experience. And these are the testimonials and these are the success stories that beyond any policy discussion we should put forward. And then again, going to the involvement and to the participation, again, a list of recommendations that we think are relatively easy to apply and would make a big dent and a big impact. We have lower fees or free access, frankly, for participation of SMEs. We know that countries like Denmark do it also for civil society. We know that there are countries where there are economic incentives and tax breaks to SMEs that participate in standardization. We know and we have seen that each national standards body should create a contact point, an SME contact point, an SME office, so that whoever can call them up and say, I want to use standards, I want to get involved, how do I do this? And then this is something that we are trying to push a lot on, is the role of SME associations at national level, at European level, to pool the resources and expertise and to try and tackle that barrier of time that I mentioned before. I was on a stage similar to this one last year in Budapest at the SME assembly that was held there last year. And on the stage with me, there was one of our technical experts who was a family-run roofing business in Austria. He said that he can go to technical meetings at national level and even at European level because he knows that the regional office, the land office from his organization sends him. But he knows that for other topics or in other areas, there will be someone else for the same association that goes so that he doesn't have to. So it's about this pooling of timing, of expertise that can help overcome certain difficulties. So we have a lot of measures, a lot of ideas to put forward. And these, I mean, they can be something that helps, but these, again, are the framework conditions. And the fundamental problem that we have to tackle, again, is the awareness and the making the case, the business case, relatable. And for that, as I was saying before, there is no better substitute than the testimonies of our entrepreneurs. What we offer as SBS is one of the ways. We list 2 ways here on how to get involved. The use, as we said, is a very important part, but for participation. The easiest way, the most common way, is to reach out to your national standards body, get involved at the national level. There is less time, perhaps, involvement. There is less of a language barrier. And you can make sure that the position on any given standards that is developed at national level can influence the position of that country at European and international level. Or the alternative, and it's what we are there for as SBS, Small Business Standards, is to become one of our experts. Every year, we nominate and finance over 70 technical experts on technical committees at European and international level, ranging from innovation management or the revision of ISO 9001 through like lifts and ropes for lift installations. We go literally from the nut bolt to AI. So we try to cover as much as possible because we know that European SMEs are everywhere. And again, Professor Welter reminded us yesterday of this case that obviously there are the unicorns, there are the gazelles, there are whatever new fancy definition comes out every day, it seems. But we have 26 million SMEs that everyday SMEs, as we learned to call them yesterday, that can get by, and all 26 million of them can benefit from the use of standards, if not for the participation of standards. And echoing what Claire was saying, we would like to leave you with a couple of testimonials of our own, of entrepreneurs and micro-enterprises and SMEs from our network. Here, we have the example of an industrial printing SME of around, I believe, 40 employees in the north of France, with a specific use on the use of standards, specific focus on the use of standards. And we know that particularly printing and this kind of business. I mean, we have, as of 2 years ago, a new machinery regulation. That machinery regulation is going to carry around 800 standards in support of its various provisions. So in terms of, again, which standards to use, that's quite a lot. And this is perhaps a field where we imagine that, yeah, of course, there are standards. It's industrial machinery. It's the bread and butter. But then, for instance, we have another testimonial that is this, that is a tattoo parlor. So a micro-enterprise, an independent worker that expanded into a tiny tattoo parlor of 3 employees, still has to use standards because gloves, because needles, because ink, because sanitary conditions. Standards are everywhere. SMEs are everywhere. We just have to work all together to make that link. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great examples in the end. I would like to open the floor for questions. We have a good 20 minutes for a discussion. I also have questions to the audience, because seeing that you know so much about the standards and it seems that you are using these standards, I mean, whenever you are taking the floor to ask us a question, don't hesitate to answer my question at the same time. Because a lot of you mentioned the issue with explorability, like we don't know what standards we need, what are those before we actually buy them. Do you see this as an issue for you if you are using the standards? Do you know which standards actually to use for your product? And when it comes to participation in standards making, does any of you have experience with being part of a technical committee? And if not, what is holding you back? Or does any of the incentives which Andrea, for example, highlighted, useful for you? So the floor is yours, and you have a lot of experts who can give you advice on any of these issues. Yes, the microphone is arriving.
I'm David Caro, President of the European Small Business Alliance. Hello?
Yeah, it works, thank you.
I'm David Caro, President of the European Small Business Alliance, and I ran my own business in automotive manufacturing supply chain for 47 years. And we have experience of standards. And I must admit, when we first applied standard, going back many years, we were terrified about what would be involved in doing it, having had any input into standards at all before that. And it was a daunting prospect. But after about a year, we got completely used to it and it became second nature. Having said that, some of the rewrites of the standards since then have been, in my mind, questionable, and also the way the assessment bodies assess the standard as to how we run it within the company. For instance, we have a standard assessment every year, which validates our certificate. Every 3 years, you have a major assessment, regardless of whether there has been any rewrite of the standard. Why? If there'd been a major rewrite of the standard, you could understand it to make sure that you've upgraded accordingly, your records are in place. But if there's been no major rewrite, why every 3 years do you have to have a major assessment, which costs you then double the standard assessment? Because instead of a 1-day assessment, you have a 2-day assessment. Also, written into some of the standards sometimes is what I regard as questionable. Not that they've been put in, but their importance and relevance to the standard. For instance, in 9001, a few years ago was introduced continuous improvement. Now, some businesses can't justify continuous improvement. You've got maybe a guy who produces, I don't know, machine parts. He's happy in the way he does things. Why is it a requirement for the standard that he demonstrates continuous improvement when his processes are happy, his customers are happy with his process? It's important to have it in because it drives improvement. But if you don't want to do it, it shouldn't mean that because you can't demonstrate it, you lose your standard. What drives the business? The standard, or does the business drive the standard? And I think that question needs to be asked. And also, how often, when standards in technical bodies are being written, and I think I'm getting it right with that, what's it called? Guide 17 is applied, which is the guide for writing a standard in accordance with SMEs and the requirements of SMEs, with SMEs in mind, in fact. And my last question, or those aren't questions or statements really, the last question I have is, you mentioned about the standards in your swimming costume business, but you also said that helped you gain funding. I'd be interested to know how the standards, having the standards, enabled you to increase the funding to your company. Thank you. Sorry I was so long-winded.
Maybe we take another one if there is another question in the room, and we group questions somehow. Thank you.
My name is Alexandra Horn. I'm head of Expo Recruitment and Corporations at the German Institute for Standardization. And maybe I can answer one of your questions or statements. I think that's exactly the point. If you don't agree with the content of a standard, you can actually get active and then change it. I think that's really the big opportunity to. Okay.
I used to be on the.
Oh, good. Yeah. Which is a good example. I mean, that's really the opportunities that you have in standardization. I also wanted to underline what Andrea said, because there were many recommendations, and I think what we have done at Dean the last years, we have implemented a lot of these recommendations, and we can really see that it's working. We have worked a lot with multipliers. We have an SME council in Germany where we work with multipliers. So we did a lot of education, a lot of information, a lot of tools, and I would really recommend whoever is in this room, whoever is multiplier, please use the existing tools. We have a monitoring tool to actually see what's coming up, which kind of topics are coming up that are important for me as SME. And we're working with an AI tool to actually get some aspects of SME needs in standardization. So I just wanted to underline the recommendations are exactly the recommendations we need to implement, and we have good examples, so feel free to use them and to implement them.
Thank you very much. There's a third question, maybe to take the third one and we answer them together.
Yeah. Stefan Moritz, Secretary General of European Entrepreneurs. We have also some critical moments in the standardization processes. For example, one of our member companies in Germany has developed ultra-thin foil to make coatings for buildings, which reduces the energy costs for this building by 30%, like as if you would put 30% of polystyrol, or how you say that in English, polystyrol, on outside the wall. This foil could be, for example, very helpful also in historical centers, on historical buildings, and so on. A problem is they could not sell it to any construction company or owner, because it was not a standard, and the engineers or architects would not sign the project. So they have made a European project, Horizon Europe, and proved the concept. Everything worked well. Everything has been tested in laboratory and on site. They have even built several buildings outside the European Union where they have countries that have allowed to apply it, like, for example, Bosnia-Herzegovina. But they could not get it as a standard. So they tried to follow the advice to participate in the working groups. The problem was that there were clear economic contrary interests. Other companies that were not agreed to allow this as a standard, otherwise they would not sell anymore their product. So why not thinking of opening this process a little bit and getting from top down to bottom up? So if we have products that have proved concept that work technically, that they get already automatically an approval, maybe together with an insurance from that the producer pays about liability, any kind of problems that could come out, that they can at least apply it, and then later on we will see how far this can become also a standard.
Thank you very much. So if I can group these, I think we have a question of how standards links to funding. I think I would give you the floor to answer first. And then we have more of a link with how standards can cater for innovation. I think this is how I understand your question. Maybe I can also give this to Mette or Andrea. And then maybe the third group is rather how standards link to conformity assessment. This was your question. And what is this continuous improvement linked to the Rule 17? Andrea, I think I would leave you the floor for that. So let's do the three rounds, starting with the funding.
So when it comes to the fundings are not directly linked to the standardization, because actually the fundings that I've managed to get is through private sectors and through the bank, right? A bank who accepted to take the risk with me. So there is nothing which came out of, I would say, European organizations or anything. But somehow the way I position the product and the way I position the traceability and the use of certifications when it comes to the quality of the textile being used, the whole European European project being again very much localized. All these give the reassurance in terms of market needs, certifications, and obviously working as well with hospitals and so on has helped me in building the trust. So that's how I raised my money, which is the first round, I would say. But that was it's privately done. So and it's credibility, absolutely. And somehow again, for me, the standardization, and this is what I see with all the different retailer partners that I have, they get so many, because it's very fierce on the market, especially right now. They all have lots of different opportunities to get to buy products, not necessarily directly in the same niche as what I have developed or thought through. But giving them this trust that gives the willingness also to try much more easily than just coming out of the blue with product coming out of different countries with low standards and so on. So that for me has helped a lot, this credibility.
Thank you very much. Perhaps Mette, if you could tackle the conformity assessment.
I think I mean this is about the link actually between standardization and then product compliance, and how it is also perceived by the notified bodies. I mean, when we look at EU product legislation, we have a fantastic framework for that and where we apply standards. But of course, we are also up to trying to find a way to align how different notified bodies approach the individual standards, how the market surveillance authorities approach the individual legislation and interpret it. So I would say, I mean, we have standard as part of a beautiful system, but we all rely on how the whole system works. And I would say there is a lot of effort at the European level in order to try to align how notified bodies approach the standards that are relevant for the different products and services. And there's a lot of initiatives trying to align market surveillance so they interpret it in the same way. But we're all only humans. And I mean, and that is extremely frustrating. I meet a lot of companies who think, I thought my product was compliant and I sell it all over Europe, and why is it suddenly that it's not? Or why is it that another company can have this done by the notified bodies and I can't? I think that is one of the key things. We need to try a way to align how the system works, but we're only humans. And it's frustrating for whoever gets there, but that's why we have all these different mechanisms in place also to complain if there are uncertainties about what is actually then the right way to do it. But I understand the frustration on the ground for sure.
And finally, could there be a different way of doing standards with the proof of concept and to help innovative products? Because we have heard this also yesterday. We met some Danish entrepreneurs, and one of them was producing an alternative to asphalt, which was a biofermented product. And they were also, I think, saying that same issues. They have an innovative product. They are looking into standards which are prescribing the composition of the material, and they are coming with something completely different, with a completely different composition. I think your example is very, very similar. Could there be a way to make space a regulatory sandbox for standards making? Would it be possible?
I mean, we know that sandboxes are used increasingly in a variety of policy areas, so why not use them in standardization as well? But I think that there is an element here that that is a bit of a red thread that goes through all of this, and it's goes through the continuous improvement. Why 9001 requires continuous improvement? Why can we not use this process as a standard? Or the example that you were mentioning from Danish companies is because too often standards are produced and tailored, and therefore prescribe notions that are targeted on the needs and specificities of larger companies. So that one of the fundamental functions of standardization and of standards is to foster interoperability, is to allow SMEs, the smaller players, to participate at all stages of the supply chain and at all stages of the life cycle of a product or of a service. And what we are seeing often is that standards are produced or reviewed, drafted or reviewed, ultimately with the fundamental and overwhelming and dominant input of large companies that more or less openly prescribe either proprietary solutions or solutions that lock in a certain process and don't allow SMEs to participate and to join in and deny them economic opportunity. So it's really fascinating to see how three seemingly disparate conversations led pretty much to the same point, because the fundamental problem to tackle is exactly the same. Ensure that interoperability, open the market and open the economic opportunities for SMEs. One of the fundamental ways of doing it, and it was mentioned before, I think by David and then by Esther, was Guide 17. Guide 17 is a document that exists both at European and international level and says, this is how a standard should be drafted to make sure that it's in the interest of SMEs, or that at least does not lock SMEs out of opportunities. And one of the fundamental issues is that it shouldn't be too prescriptive, it shouldn't set the bar too high, and essentially it shouldn't make it possible for the big players that are in the room in the technical discussion to impose de facto their proprietary solutions. Based on Guide 17, we do quite a lot of work. Also at SBS is one of the things that we see as the main added value that we give. That is a SME compatibility test. That is something that is drafted on Guide 17, and it can be any entrepreneur, any SME can go in. I have these standards that I use or that I would like to use. There is 13, 14 questions under a different set of criteria molded around Guide 17. How good is this standard? Is it good? Is it okay but should be reviewed? Or is it actively impeding my economic opportunity as an SME? So that is something that obviously we want to see more and more used. But again, interoperability, opening market, don't deny opportunities.
Thank you very much. We have time for another short round of questions. Yet I see two hands. Sorry, you have follow-up, yes.
The major revision every 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
You didn't address that. Why do you have to have a major
Ultimately, the revision of the standard itself, it's something that is written in the standard. But I think that what you mentioned also concerned, and is what Mette touched on, market surveillance. The fact it's more about the certification than about the standard itself. So it's something more downstream. So that is the problem more of market surveillance legislation and market surveillance authorities in the member state, I think, rather than of standardization and of the standard in and of itself. Because standards ultimately have to be reviewed when the state of the art changes, not before. So it is, I completely agree with you that a major revision in terms of market surveillance is not justified if there is no new standard.
Thank you. Microphone is arriving here, and then there was another question in the back.
Thank you. Tina Vengsgaard, I'm head of Danish standards, so thank you very much for the good presentations. It's always interesting to hear your work presented by people related to the business. So more a comment than a question. I think AI we haven't really talked about. I think AI is going to be a game changer in the world of standards. It's something that both in Danish standards, but I know also in all the other countries in Europe, this is something that's being invested in heavily. When we talk about standards as big sources of information, it's a perfect, let's say, playground for AI, and that goes both in terms of the challenges that you guys also described in terms of finding the right standards, how to actually interpret and understand the standards, and also how to implement them. So I think there will be a lot of new tools and products available in that sense in the coming years. And then I just wanted to add one more thing. We have been looking heavily into how we can get more SMEs involved in standardization. And time is always the biggest challenge that we hear for obvious reasons. One of the things we've been looking into is building, we call it in a working title, a DS community. And I know that several of the other European countries have something similar. The concepts vary a little bit, and it's not everywhere. But basically what we're looking into is building an online platform where you'll be able to get more access, more insight into activities around standardization. It's still concept in development, so in 3 weeks' time, when I've had the board meeting, I will know more about the future of this. But I've also just learned that there are sort of similar initiatives in a number of other countries, so at least it could be a way in to the world of standardization. Thank you.
Let's hope that the AI you mentioned is also going to save some time for SMEs precisely, and will also facilitate their participation.
Yes, my name is Flemming Frederiksen. I have my own company. I work as a subcontractor in the metal industry, so we use a lot of standards. My question was a little bit down the same line to the business model of making standards. The European Court of Rules decided that EU harmonized standards should be freely available for some of them, and as similar to the other comment that AI and ChatGPT will give some of us access to standards, maybe without we should have be allowed to it. But how will you? How can the business model work under these conditions?
Thank you very much. We don't have anybody from a standard making body, unfortunately, but maybe Andrea is the closest to this.
I mean, I wouldn't want to put myself in the shoes, I have to say, but I mean, we as much as we try to act a lot, unfortunately, we cannot really decide the pricing of standards that is decided by national standards bodies or by ISO. It's true what is said that as of last year, there are online readability platforms on which harmonized standards have to be made publicly available and consultable, although not downloadable, by all economic actors. So national standards bodies have to make them available, and those platforms are up and running. So please use them. I was speaking actually to Alexandra yesterday at DIN, that she told me that she was quite surprised to see that despite all the publicity, albeit in our small standard circle perhaps, but all the publicity about this ruling, the figures of requests and consultations for harmonized standards on the platforms are not that high. So perhaps that is part of the awareness gap that we have to overcome. In terms of how to access standards that are not harmonized standards, so that don't fall under these categories, again, among the recommendations that I listed before, there was indeed the sale of standards that for SMEs has to be at a lower price, or the idea that is done in certain countries of sending curated bundles of standards. So that is like, okay, you are an SME or SME association that is active in this field. We reach out to you, we give you a formulaire, a form to fill in. Based on what you tell us, these are the 10, 20 standards that you as an SME or that you as SME organization should probably be using or could be useful to you. And then if it's an SME association, that bundle can and should be distributed to the individual SMEs in their network. So that, for instance, if a national SME buys that bundle package, that means that all their regional or departmental or whatever downstream SMEs, associations or individual SMEs have access to that standard. Those are ways in which we can leverage the role also of our SME association to really reach the ground level and the individual SMEs. Because for us, speaking of as an SME association at the European level, but also at the national level, we know that there are similar problems. It's extremely difficult to go all the way down to the individual SME. And it goes back to what we were saying at the start. In a way, it's similar. When I have SME associations that are on a national level, if I send them an email or a request from input, I know that half of them will reply. But then when they send it down to the regional level, maybe 1/3 of them will reply. When the regional send it down either to the individual SME or to the departmental level, maybe 10% replies because they don't have time. So it's almost like an aqueduct that has so much water, so much resources, but at every joint, you lose half, you lose 1/3, you lose 2/3, what is left at the end? So what we need to have in terms of conditions is a structure that fortifies that process of that ultimately is a top-down process. It's not a top-down process, but rather a bottom-up that allows us to gather more and more the input and the necessities and what our SME at the ground level needs, what the individual entrepreneur needs.
Thank you very much. This marks the end of this session. Thank you very much for your contributions and insightful questions. I would like to thank to all our speakers for sharing their experience. And we wish Claire good luck to scaling up her product with the help of standards. And hopefully in some years we will see you contributing to an international standards on adaptive swimwear for women. Thank you very much.
Thank you.